Hey guys, welcome back to a brand new episode of the Self Betterment Project. Now, obviously, if you've been keeping up, you'll notice several things. First of all, I'm a little under the weather, so you'll definitely hear that in my voice. But besides that, though, I hope you guys are doing well. I hope all of you are, happy and healthy and not like me, have a stuffy nose and whatnot. But besides that, the entire Self Betterment Project is evolving. I know, it's one of the most coolest things I've ever witnessed. It's like my podcast is kind of like a Pokemon at this point, and it's just evolving. I don't know into what, but, into something pretty cool. So welcome to the actual first episode of a brand new season of the Self Betterment Project. This season, we're tackling one of the most important things of self-betterment. And not just self-betterment in general. You don't have to be all high and mighty and so caught up with self-betterment and self-improvement like I am. But even to the average person, it's important to understand the concept spoken about this season, because this season, we're talking about habits. Now, before you get too excited and freaked out, calm down, relax. This is how we're going to be talking about habits through the season. Now, just in general terms, each season of the Self Betterment Project podcast runs for 4 months, like a season. And what happens in this 4 months is that we talk about a concept. We start off at the philosophy of things, of that concept. We break it down into the philosophy reasoning. We break it down into the structure of it, into saying, why should people care? We talk about the philosophy, sure. We talk about why human beings, think about the philosophy, because it has some sort of philosophical meaning. But from that, we bring it towards real life meaning, right? Why should you and I care about things like that? Why should you and I care about the topic being, discussed? From there, we trickle down all the way down to research and learning about the physical, neurological, psychological, and all this kind of research to back up why it's a good idea or not a good idea, and how to combat certain things throughout the topic. Say if it's about habits, we'll be talking about how to build habits, the neurological connections between good habits and bad habits, and how to attack it from a scientific standpoint, and what happens in the brain, and so on and so forth. Really technical stuff. All the way down to a physical thing you can do in your life to change something in your life for the better. So when we're talking about habits, we'll talk about the philosophy of habits this season. We'll talk about the reasoning of the philosophical understanding of habits. We'll talk about real life reasoning and why you and I should even care about habits. Going all the way from that to researching habits, how habits is also a subderivative of addiction or vice versa, and how to deal with one or the other, how to identify habits, addictions, and things like that, how to understand that within you, not in just a physical way, but in a psychological, neurological way, right? We'll talk about what happens in the brain and why do people, have bad habits, even though they don't want it. What's going on there? All the way down to physical things you can do to build a habit, kill an addiction, to kill a habit, to direct and understand what habits are in a way that you can construct habit groups that you want to achieve for the next coming year. We talk about what habits even are, right? What's a habit? Habit isn't like a part of you. It's kind of like the clothing you wear. Every time life throws curveballs at you, you got to adopt new kinds of habits and then deal with it, right? So that and a lot of many different other things, but that's basically the gist of it. We go all the way from philosophy all the way down to physical things and seeing how we can change something. This is something I've always wanted to talk about, but I didn't, back then I didn't have a podcast, and now I do. Now I have a place to record and film. So that's great. So now, we're taking a step forward in the Self Betterment Project. And my goal from here is that it's not to like change you into becoming a self-betterment kind of advocate. It's not like that. Long story short, even if you don't vibe with it, as long as you kind of like think about it, have something to think about it for, that's fine for me. I'm not telling you, it's not necessarily a call to action. Even if you don't act or change from it, it's a interesting conversation to be a part of it. So by the end of the season, you'll be able to see your life a little differently, because we're talking about habits, and you'll be able to identify habits in your friends, within you, why you do certain things, what's going on neurologically, in psychologically, subliminally, things like that. And you will start seeing the world a little differently. But that's basically the gist of seasons. That's how the seasons go. So this season, season 1, the very first season of the Self Betterment Project, we're talking about habits. And I welcome all of you with warm, sweaty hands, because it's kind of hot in here and I'm probably going to get more sick. But look at this, I'm sweating. Why am I always sweating? Honestly though, besides the seasons and all of these different changes, it feels great. It feels great to just start the project with a firm idea, and it's going to be fun. And it's about time that the Self Betterment Project podcast started acting like a real podcast, And that means I'm going to be uploading weekly. That's right, ladies and gentlemen. Until further notice, the podcast will be coming out Monday at 7 a.m. And you can find this podcast literally anywhere that you can listen to things from. One of the most popular places is Spotify. We also have one of the other popular places is Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts recently, even on YouTube. Heck, if you want a downloadable MP3 file, I'll give it to you. I don't care. Okay, just email me, write it in the comment section, and I'll send you an MP3 version of my podcast. And I encourage you to listen to it from anywhere, because, it helps out the podcast and it shows me that you guys are interested and engaged. If you guys want to talk about different things throughout the season as well, so say we're talking about habits and you want to ask a question about habits, that you have been fighting a habit for years, but somehow you can't get through it, definitely reach out to me. DM me on the Instagram page of the Self Betterment Project. Yeah, the Self Betterment Project has an Instagram page now. You guys should definitely follow it. So DM me, email the Self Betterment Project. You can email the Self Betterment Project at theselfbettermentproject@gmail.com. And literally anywhere you can find me, just email me. You have a habit you want to build. You have a habit or addiction you want to kill. Or maybe you're just kind of curious and you want me to talk about or research some of the aspects of habits, so maybe you can learn about it. It's not just me talking to you guys. Okay, this podcast is kind of like a community having a conversation. So definitely reach out to me if there are any questions you guys have regarding habits. And on top of that, if you guys know a lot about habits and you want to be a part of the podcast, again, reach out to me, email me, DM me, I don't know, throw a rock with a message through my window. If you've done something worth having a conversation about, let's have a podcast together. You can come on board the podcast as a guest. So yeah, I know that was a lot to talk about. I'm sick, so again, pardon my voice. So welcome to episode 1, the actual ad. And this episode 1 of season 1, we'll be talking about a rough introduction of the philosophy of habits. What are habits? And why should you care? Is habits like a tangible thing? Are they important? What are human beings up to that we devise habits? This and a lot more coming up in this episode. The philosophy of habits is simply this, okay? From early on, way back when, humanity had these mechanisms to automate certain actions and behavioral thought patterns, right? So a lot of these automated systems in our brain, in our circuitry, biologically speaking, helps us reduce the resources required to consciously think about it and make something easily doable, which is a great thing. If you think about it from a scientific point of view, habits are great. They allow you to do something without giving too much effort of thought into it, right? Your brain's kind of like on standby mode, but you still do the action, right? Or you think that way. You do something. Those are behavioral thought patterns along with actual physical actions associated with a habit. That being said, though, what's the philosophy of habits? Philosophy of habits talks about basically your entire viewpoint of the world and how you want to obtain certain actions and make them easier for you. But in order for you to identify actions or thought patterns that you want to adopt, you have to understand the side effects, the repercussions associated with that action. And people have to really start thinking about their lives this way and really get really philosophical with themselves to say, what is it that I'm trying to do? And why am I automating it? Why do I want to automate a certain action? If I give you an example, say you're a YouTuber in his 20s, like me, for example, And you want to automate certain habits. Well, okay, fine. You want to automate certain habits, so what do you automate? Well, the philosophy of human life in that scenario would be, okay, I'm trying to do something, and in order to achieve that goal or purpose or reason in my life, I have to do these actions. These actions are pretty tough, always consciously thinking about it, and therefore, I'm going to automate these actions because I know they will help me in my purpose and goal in my life. So when you talk about habits in the philosophy, just the mental philosophy of habits, you have to look at the goal. You have to have a goal, right? You can't just be like, I'm going to do this one thing and because it's good. I'm going to, wake up early in the morning, or I'm going to eat celery and slim down and drink plenty of water. Yeah, these are all good habits. And in a way, there are always going to be some universal habits, or more so universal habits, that anybody can adopt, right? Drinking water, for example. All of you are human beings. All of you could use a little more water. So drink your water. And unlike me, who drinks more so coffee than water. But hey, I'm building that habit, okay? Building that habit through the season. So you have to have a goal, long story short. Because habits are physical actions and thought patterns that lead to something. If you don't have a goal in your life, all of your actions kind of is meaningless, philosophically speaking, not biologically. So philosophically speaking, it's kind of like you're doing things with no direction, right? So when it comes to the philosophy of habits, you have to have a goal, and then you have to break that goal into actions that reach the goal. From there, you'll realize doing these actions consciously takes a lot of effort and it's tiring. Then you build habits, right? These actions become automated, whether it be behavioral thought patterns, whether it be a mindset, whether it be a mentality, or whether it be a physical action you do, like with your hands and feet and your brain and whatever, right? So that's basically the gist of the philosophy of habits as far as it goes for mental philosophy. You have to know about life and your goal. Really heavy stuff. And obviously not everybody knows their life meaning or purpose. At the age of 20, 21, heck, even 50-year-olds may not know where they're going. But you gotta have a goal. You gotta have a direction. Make sense? Great. But the philosophy of habits goes beyond just the mental philosophy of things, right? You can talk about it in a objective point of view. So if you want to talk about objective point of view, this is where conversations like people say, you gotta have more water. You gotta, wake up at a healthy, decent time. You gotta sleep at a healthy, decent hour. And many other habits that a lot of people say objectively is good for us human beings. And this is where a lot of things start being a little interesting. So when it comes to a human being, eating, exercising, mental thought patterns, don't always think that the world is out to get you, for example. These are all objective things that people can tell you. But when you really start seeing this in the world, you start realizing that a lot of people can go the other way, right? And habits is one of those important and really, really, really complex things in life that really can make or break you in the world, right? And why do I say this? Well, because habits, interestingly enough, are tied in with not just your goals in life, but it's also being influenced by your body and your mind's ability to adapt. So when you talk about objectively somewhat true habits, sleep on time, wake up on time, drink plenty of water. Well, what happens, say, if my body adapted to not having a lot of water? What happens if I'm a night owl? Is that a wrong thing? Is that a good thing or a bad thing? What if my body has adapted to these kind of habitual things I've been doing for who knows how long? Does that mean you're right because you wake up at 7 and I'm wrong because I sleep at 3 but get most of my important work done at night because I'm a night owl? Or is it because that I'm wrong because I don't drink enough water, but for some reason I don't feel that bad? So you can't just talk about objective habits to be true all around, because then you need to understand that, people have adapted. Their bodies and their minds have adapted. And then you'll be like, okay, fine. I guess in certain things, there is a difference, right? Maybe night owls aren't so bad. Maybe waking up early isn't so bad. Whatever works for you. But then you have to understand the limitation of the human body. Drinking more water is always more important, right? Sure, you can survive with little amount of water, but that's just because your body has adapted to it. But the goal of life isn't to just survive. Your body can adapt to lower amounts of water and you can survive, sure. But if you want to thrive, you want to go beyond it, then drink more water, right? This is when things start getting tangled up. And that's when you'll start hearing about people's adaptations. You'll start hearing about people's mentalities towards habit and growth. Because why should I drink more water if I'm alive? That's a genuine conversation I've had with someone. Why should I have more water? Because I'm living. But the point is, it's not to just live and exist, it's to thrive, right? You want to be better, then you have more water. But then, one thing leads to another. So it's very complicated. As you can see, what happens when you start going from philosophical habits, which is pretty easy and understandable, all the way to actual things that you can define as habits and what are good and what are bad. And that's what we're going to take a good look into in the first month of this season. The philosophy of habits, the understanding of adaptation with habits, the understanding of, even though it's adapted, what's optimal, right? For example, you can make $50,000 a year, which is great. But if I told you could be happier and you could be less stressed out, you could be more fulfilled and make more money, then that would be the optimal choice. So it's not like I'm saying this is bad or that's bad, but rather what's the optimal goal, right? So that's what we're going to be talking about in the first month, the first quarter of the season. When I started studying habits, man, that was a huge thing for me. It took me quite a while. And even to this day, I'm still learning, because you can talk about the philosophy and then it's kind of like you can talk to people about habits and they'll be like, hey, I'm alive, so why do I care? But the point isn't to be alive. The point is to thrive. But maybe they don't even care about thriving. Then what do you do? Right? Maybe you're going through habits, right? So that's the other aspect of habits, that not just talking to it with other people and whatnot, but what are you going through right now? What are you struggling with? And how are you tackling that or not tackling that? The philosophy of habits also has a mental philosophy of things. Now, I've talked about the mental philosophy in a way of like human life philosophy. I exist, here's a purpose and whatnot. Then I talked about the objective kind of habits that you may hear throughout the world. And then now we come to something called the mental philosophy of habits. Then this is more mental, more psychological, right? Not just mental, like philosophy. So the psychological philosophy of habits is started off with this one statement, which is basically, do you identify with your habits? And this really puts habits into perspective to teach you or to show to you that a lot of people living through our lives has habits that they identify with. And then there's also another side that looks at habits as tools that we can change. These are weapons that we use to tackle life and carve out what we want in life. And if in a certain area this weapon isn't working, we switch it out with another habit. But sometimes you live and you don't think about habits like that. So a lot of the things that you do, you identify with your character, like, oh, that's me. And as far as character goes, you have to be very careful on understanding what part of your character is defined by habits and what part of your character is defined by your experiences and your core beliefs and understandings of life. Because say if you have a bad habit, because those exist, and you identify with it saying, this is who I am, you have just literally looked at your habits as a part of your skin. That's a dangerous thing to do. Because once you believe that it is to be you, it's really hard to cut away from it. And if this habit is really destructive, in a long term is destructive, or is holding you back in life, that's really going to hurt. Whereas if you looked at habits in a way that you look at clothing throughout seasons, right? You have different clothing for different seasons. When it's winter time, you're not going to wear shorts and like a tank top like you do in summer, right? No, of course, you'd freeze to death. So why don't we look at habits that way throughout this entire season? Why don't we understand the baseline that this season talks about habits when it comes to the psychological meaning of habits is that it's a tool. It's like clothing, and you should be okay with change. You should be okay with interchanging them every week, every month, or whatever you have going on in your life. You may need to change your habits, right? And it doesn't mean it's a bad thing. You don't have to change your habits and be like, oh man, I gotta change who I am. Yo, when you don't gotta be so caught up emotionally when you talk about habit change, right? Because it's kind of like being said like, oh man, I gotta change clothes to go outside because it's a different season. Yeah, different scenarios in life require you to act differently. And being okay with change is very important in understanding that habits are tools that you can use to build and carve out your life, right? So be okay with change. Be okay with adapting. And just because you've adapted to a different habit doesn't mean you can't go back to it later on, right? So for example, maybe you were at school and your habit included you to study a lot or sleep a little earlier. Maybe you graduated. I know a lot of my friends have graduated and now you're in a bigger world. So now you have to change your habits, right? You can't just keep acting like you're in school. You gotta change your habits to accommodate work and your health and all these other grown-up things, right? And that's what you ought to be doing. You should change your habits to accommodate to your lifestyle that could last for like a couple months to even a couple years. Say, this is how my life's gonna be for the next few years, so I gotta change my habits to accommodate and thrive throughout these times. And that's why it's important to distinguish the difference between habit as a character and habit as tools and clothing that you have to change as the seasons come and go, because your life will always keep shifting. And in order to do this, you have to understand the core understanding of change and that it is okay, that it is not just okay, but it is encouraged. Adapt and change. It doesn't mean you're changing who you are in the core and you've changed and you've thrown your old self away. Look, change never works like that. Okay? First of all, you can never throw away your old self at one go. Okay? You can always evolve and grow, but you never cut things out. You can evolve in a way where something counteracts your old self, but it doesn't mean you've cut out your old self. And when you start looking at change as a good thing, you welcome change into habits. And you realize changing habits is a good thing. You can change habits to accommodate to whatever your life throws at you. And also the understanding of just existing versus thriving will also give you the pillar of drive, of reason, of why you need to change habits, right? Because why would I ever change my habits if I'm alive? But if you want to thrive and be optimal and grow and succeed, then you have to change your habits. But then the question would be, oh, well, how do I change habits because it's a part of me? Well, as we learned, it's not. It should be used like a tool. So be open to change. So now you've gotten two important mindsets, two important pieces of information. Learn to thrive and not just exist. And learn to accept change and then use habits as a tool. Habits aren't a part of your skin, which is a good thing. Because if you keep living the same way throughout your entire life, you will keep crashing and crashing and crashing. And that's gonna hurt in life. Mentally, psychologically, in relationships, in friendships, in finances, in getting new jobs, or even finding meaning and purpose in your life. Because if you're failing at everything, then you're like, what's the point of any of this? Habits are tools. They're not a part of your character. And in life, if you want to succeed and thrive, you have to learn how to use these tools and know how to master several different tools based on what you are given in life or what your goals are in life or what you're achieving in life. Different situations require different solutions, so be okay to change. That is the first episode of the Self Betterment Project, Season 1, Episode 1. Habits are tools. And I hope you understood, or maybe you have a little more insight to the different philosophies of habits that you will see across the world, the objective kind of habits, and how people adapt, and how adaptation can be a part of your solution of habits, or changing habits or not changing habits. You've understood the life philosophy of habits, and now you've understood the mental psychological aspect of habits. On the next episode, actually, we have a very special guest that's coming on to talk about habits, and we talk about habits quite a bit, so I hope you'll come back and hear out his story on habits and all that he has to say. But as of right now, thanks for listening. Again, remember that the Self Betterment Project can be found on literally anywhere. Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Apple Music. I don't know if Apple Music and Apple Podcasts are different things. But Spotify, heck, you want an MP3 file? I'll give it to you. Honestly. And furthermore, email me, DM me if you have any questions, or certain things about habits you want to talk about. Maybe the philosophy of habits, maybe the mental aspect of habits, maybe physical and neurological, biochemical aspects of habits as well. Because we'll be diving into all of those things this season. Now, I hope my voice wasn't too airy because I was too sick and you guys enjoyed this podcast. And if you really enjoy this podcast, you can support this podcast on Patreon at patreon.com/thisisad. That's where you can fund me to help you understand more about habits throughout the season and keep making podcasts, because I'd rather be helping people than not. And if you really enjoyed this podcast, you can always support the podcast at Patreon at patreon.com/thisisad, just for $2 a month. That's as cheap as your coffee for the whole month. And besides that, I'll see you guys in the next one.